Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Now, we'd normally give credit to the questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, but on such short notice, we had no time on this one. Well, back on the show is Mr. Paul Goranson. Paul is the Chief Executive Officer and Director at Encore Energy. We've also got Mr. Bill Sheriff here with us as well. He joined at the last minute. Bill is the Executive Chairman of Encore. The company is a United States in situ recovery-focused uranium development and near-term production-capable company with assets spread across Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, and we can say potentially now you can add South Dakota to that list. Encore is a uranium portfolio company at SmithWeekly Research, as well as within our elite service. Encore Energy is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol EU, and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol ENCUF. Paul and Bill, welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks for having us.
Well, guys, up front here, I want to give some credit to both of you specifically, and also to the broader team and the efforts by the Azarga team to see this deal put together, as well as our key consultants off stage. I would point out that this is a notable milestone and a big piece to a bigger strategic puzzle that is being executed on. But why don't you give us your thoughts? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, it's a big piece of our strategy. As you know, we've talked about how we want to be the premier ISR operator in the U.S. And by bringing in the assets that Azarga brings with it, we will see, we'll have a well-known set of properties that we'll be able to execute on that larger picture plan of becoming that premier ISR operator. It's exciting. We've still got a lot of work ahead of us before we get to close, but it's an exciting time and looking forward to getting it done.
Bill, any comments that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it really just rounds out the first major part of our business plan, in that we had established, our short-term aspects in the company in terms of production visibility, being in Texas, with the 2 licensed plants that we have, and currently one of them's under renovation, should be completed within the next 9 months or so for under $1 million. And then also with our very large long-term package of New Mexico assets with over 100 million pounds in all categories combined, and dominant position in the biggest uranium district in the U.S. out there. So what Azarga brings us really is that time period in between the two, in between the short term in Texas and the long term in New Mexico, and it bridges that gap very nicely with the South Dakota Dewey Burdock project, as well as the Gas Hills project in Wyoming. And Dewey is almost completely permitted, right on the cusp of full permitting. But Wyoming being such a favorable state, who knows? Gas Hills with their favorable PEA, it's not inconceivable that the permitting there could run up and be hot on the heels of Dewey, if not right in the same time frame. And their land position in South Dakota is such that the mineralization associated with Dewey is quite likely to be expanded. They've spent most of their time and effort on bringing those up to speed. So the Dewey Terrace and Aladdin projects in East Wyoming really haven't seen much work, but they're very, very promising. Lots of drill holes with good mineralized intercepts in it. So the upside's really, really fantastic there as well. Fills in that middle ground and gives us a very important presence in Wyoming, which Wyoming and Texas are the 2 places to be for ISR in the U.S. So.
And I'll add that with those properties also, with the recent work they've done on Gas Hills, Gas Hills has been looked at as being a potential ISR target. Cameco has a rather large position there. They've already fully licensed and run a full EIS on it. So it means that Gas Hills is well established and well quantified. So it should create a more streamlined permitting and licensing process as well.
This fits in really well, and I like how Bill put it with long-term assets, short-term assets, and medium-term assets. It really does slot in quite well. I want to ask Bill here, give us just a brief overview of the transaction details and what Encore looks like pro forma here.
Here again, I think their assets are underappreciated, and certainly when you put that in the context of the ISR team we have at Encore, as ability to really rationalize those assets and get them into production, it's a value-added proposition. But I think pretty clearly the metrics on this should propel Encore considerably higher than it is now, just because it does complete the pipeline. It's a very, very compelling pipeline of production, and it sees us within the next 3 or 4 years of getting up to that 3 or 4 million pound a year production potential, and en route to our 5 million that we've stated we'd like to get to per annum. And certainly a key step in the further consolidation. It fits nicely on our first M&A of Westwater, where we got the 2 licensed plants in Texas and a good portion of the New Mexico assets. It just continues our strategy. Makes us larger. Certainly a key component of this is that it'll put us in very good position to uplist to the NASDAQ or the NYSE Amex. Most likely the NASDAQ. We've had discussions regarding that, and certainly we qualify. So we'll definitely be looking to do that on the heels of this transaction.
Yeah, that sounds great, Bill, and that skips over a TSX big board listing. Perhaps we just go ahead and move forward to the NASDAQ here. So I like that thought process, and I also like the fact that it sounds like the plate isn't quite full, and that you guys are still out there looking for potential transactions that make a lot of sense to grow this business further and to consolidate, and also with the intention of eventually here focusing in pretty hard on the production component of things. We should get some people here that will probably want to argue about the dilution component from this deal. Perhaps they don't see at this stage of the market, nor the big picture value that you guys see. Paul, I'd like your comments on that.
This transaction is, what one would classify as accretive, and there's always that argument out there by dilution, et cetera. But one of the things our shareholders have expressed to us many times is that they see our growth path not just through organically, but also transactionally. And this is the ideal use of our company currency, which is our shares, to be able to grow the company and provide real assets that could be part of our complement to assets we already have, but also provide us a good pipeline of projects for production, low-cost production online that could become really rather profitable depending on where the uranium market ends up and where it ends up over the long period of time. So I think it's good value, it's accretive, and that all our shareholders will benefit ultimately for this in the long run.
Yeah, I would just follow up on that, in that my first argument to someone that makes that proposition is that it's not dilutive. There's a popular misconception among some of the, I don't know, I guess maybe newer investors in the sector that dilution happens every time you issue stock. The issue of how many shares you have out has nothing to do with dilution. It is when you have less value per share as a result of issuing shares that you have dilution. And when you have more value per share issued, then it's accretive. And I think pretty clearly, as Paul stated, when you look at the assets that we're bringing in, the jurisdictions that we're bringing them in, the economic metrics on the 2 main projects, plus the tremendous upside on, as I mentioned, Dewey Terrace and Aladdin, that one would be hard pressed and not really be very aware of those assets, not have a good understanding of them to assert that it's in any way dilutive.
Fully agreed. I think that the focus here is on the value component, what price you're paying, and also where the market cap is. I think investors need to focus more on the market cap, not necessarily the share count. As a good few examples, you can look to places like Australia, where you have these penny dreadfuls that trade for 1/10 of a penny or 2/10 of a penny, that have a boatload of shares out by anybody in North America standard. Yet that value can still be delivered. And there's a few examples. Bill, you mentioned just a little while ago, and you kind of alluded to it. What is, assuming this deal closes, what is on the Encore team's level of appetite for potentially more M&A deals before you dial in the focus on development and production?
Well, I think I think the two are not necessarily related. I think, we've clearly got with this merger, especially a pipeline of established production-worthy, compelling economic opportunities to develop sequentially into production. And I don't see anything in terms of the acquisition strategy interrupting that, but being additive to that. Here again, this will give us the potential to get to 3 to 4 million pounds a year pretty easily. Ideally, we've stated we'd like to get to 5. If we happen to get to 6, so be it. That's just fine. Nothing wrong with being an overachiever. But, clearly we'll be looking for other assets that can fit in there. What it does, though, is it really increases our flexibility to look up and down the time frame in terms of whether it's short term or midterm, in terms of, or even long term, in terms of where that next asset comes from. Because now we've got a complete pipeline of short-term, mid-term, and long-term projects. So we don't really have a need, but other than to grow. Any additional acquisitions will be, I think that's an advantage for us, in that we'll be able to look at what makes the most financial sense. It doesn't matter if it comes in 2 years or 5 years, but what's the best value for us out there? And so this is the really key one that really completes our plate, if you will. Everything else is simply adding to that plate. It's not going to rearrange the time frame on this. So, we're quite happy with the hand we've got as described with these projects. Certainly, there'll be some additional work done to increase them as time goes on in terms of their size. Really, just a lot of flexibility in terms of where we go on the next acquisition, and I don't think it'll interrupt or change current plans for development on any of our assets. Rather, just add to that production profile.
And I think going forward, M&A should be looked at as a separate component that also has to do with what price are you paying for that M&A and that project. And if the price is good, then who cares what the timeline is, so to speak. I think
Right.
It pays for itself later in the cycle if you're paying the right price here. And I think that's an important piece to point out. Paul, on jurisdictions, obviously the United States is first and foremost, but maybe you can just give us a flavor on what other jurisdictions the company would consider if the right deal presented itself.
Well, if you're talking about outside internationally, the jurisdictions where you see the most, every jurisdiction has its challenges, but we've seen some properties in Canada and Australia that seem to have some movement with respect to the permitting. And of course, you always just run into the politics situation, but those are jurisdictions where they're not as easy as, say, some of the African jurisdictions, et cetera. But you're dealing with first world regulatory environments. We talked about trying to be, our message has been to be, not only to do this economically and everything else, but also to do it in a manner that has a minimum amount of footprint. It becomes something that when you work in an environment, a regulatory environment where that's recognized, that's where we see the benefit, and then also the risk of nationalization, et cetera, that you might see in some other countries. And but we'd also know that places like Namibia has been well established, but obviously it's principally a conventional open pit, low grade materials that aren't necessarily at this moment within our portfolio. And so, there'd be some comfort outside the U.S., but I'll just go back and restate that the U.S. is where we know our business. And so that's where we have the highest level of comfort.
Appreciate that, Paul, and certainly the team there at Encore has experience stretching beyond the U.S., and so that's also a nice adder as well, should the time come to look at other jurisdictions. Paul, I want to stay with you. You'll be performing some in-depth reviews of these projects from a technical standpoint to confirm the work done to date, identifying problem areas that may be there and maybe some incorrect assumptions, plus adding some Goranson style tweaks to them. Talk about that and where maybe some of the focus will be initially.
Well, with respect to the properties that come in, as Bill mentioned earlier, is that Dewey Burdock has got the bulk of its permitting and licensing done. From a technical perspective, it's a very good deposit. It's got good grades. It's got known in situ recovery, amenability for ISR, good performance. But it is in a challenging jurisdiction with respect to the federal aspects of it. So we're going to look hard at what needs to be done, what's left to be done, where things are relative to closing all those loops that might be open with respect to their permits and everything prior to committing to moving forward on development. Making sure we understand those fully, but also knowing that there are currently legal challenges going on with Dewey Burdock that, we are confident that that will be prevailed upon. They prevailed on every issue so far, but nonetheless, it does always put a little bit of uncertainty to it. With respect to Wyoming, which is a jurisdiction I know very well, we're going to look hard at Aladdin, even Dewey Terrace, which is in Wyoming as well, to see what those options are there. But also looking hard at the Gas Hills because, Azarga did just release a PEA on Gas Hills. I want to look at that project relative to how my experience with Cameco working on the Gas Hills project that they had, which is literally next door, and how the leaching operations, the way the uranium is recovered, but also the operating parameters and everything that were assumed within the PEA relative to my experience. I assume we will be making some significant changes to, as a result of just basically taking collective experience and putting it into that thought. If you go look at the Azarga PEA, they do mention that they have not evaluated with respect to alkaline leaching, et cetera, but that's one of the things that's been recommended. Having worked on the adjacent property where they did evaluate it with alkaline leaching, I believe that one might be one that would be looked at initially. It'll be the easiest to permit, and frankly, Wyoming is a good jurisdiction to be doing anything with respect to uranium mining, like Texas. It's an agreement state. So we'll look at the roadblocks are to execute on Dewey Burdock that Azarga has identified very well, but where those line out on timing. And then looking at the near-term projects, including some of the exploration plays, what we need to do to dress those up, but also advancing Gas Hills. I probably would look at evaluating what it would take to do to begin looking at permitting that right away so that it will be that midterm project for us along with Dewey Burdock.
Good points, Paul. I appreciate that. That's a good set of areas to cover there, and some of the things you're going to be looking at, and then also the focus a little bit more on Gas Hills, how potentially quickly that one there could move forward.
Yeah,
Bill, I want to kick it over to you for a sec here. If things continue to shape up for the company and your guys' continued execution on strategy, the market cap continues to grow here, and you guys, unlike a lot of companies in the space, have done a nice job of maintaining that market cap, which has enabled you to do things that other companies may not have the capabilities to do. If the valuations are good, what's holding the company back here in the near term, given some of these CapEx financings that are needed for some of these projects, and also the fact that you guys don't necessarily need offtake initially? If the market cap is there and the conditions are right, would you guys pull the trigger on some of these CapExes?
I think, here again, the CapExes are so modest compared to the market caps that, you've got to look at, whether it's for acquisitions or CapEx or, expansion of your current facilities. Obviously, our Texas production will. So, yeah, I think in terms of the question of, a capital raise to look at CapEx, certainly, the market ebbs and flows even during the up cycle that we've had for the last, better part of the last year and a half now. We'd be looking to take advantage of that for CapEx or for expansion of facilities. Here again, even with this acquisition, don't forget Texas is coming on with production first. And, we've got a lot of optionality on our plants down there. The original plant with 800,000 pounds a year production capacity is currently under renovation and will be completed for under $1 million, within the next 9 months or so. Depending on the market, we may well decide that we need to increase our production size there because we aren't limited by permit. So it's a bit modular, and it's pretty easy to upscale our production size there. So, depending upon how that goes, and then once you're in production, you've also got your cash flow, which will certainly diminish your need to go to the capital markets. So, it's a difficult question to ask without seeing a chart of the future. But certainly open to that idea. But you even look at the capex on Dewey Burdock or something, and it's a very small fraction of our market cap. So, I don't think we'll be in any hurry to hit the market for that, but certainly we'll be looking for those opportunities as they come along. And if the market gets a bit carried away, then we'll be a bit more aggressive on that front.
That pretty much aligns with what my view is on this as well. And that'll also have a big chunk to do with continued delivery on strategy going forward here, which is also a pretty big unknown component that can be quite successful as well. Paul, can you just go back for a moment and maybe just give the audience a critical path schedule as it stands now with this acquisition? Talk about just some of the major milestones that you see coming down over the next, say, call it 2 years. Maybe just give us some highlights. Obviously, Texas is still first in line, but walk us through.
Once we're done, once this transaction gets closed, which we hope to have done before the, by end of November, the next thing we'll be doing is we'll be continuing to advance our Texas properties. Our intention is to be, we've got the Rosita plant will be completed. The upgrades will be completed by end of second quarter or beginning of second quarter 2022. We intend to have, we'll be submitting license amendments, et cetera, for these additional properties that we're bringing in. And then in Texas, so that they can be feed for Rosita, to where they would be able to start spending money to develop those and put them into production capability by 2023. And that way we could meet our current offtake agreement we have and be able to deliver into that because we expect the uranium price to be up. Meanwhile, the other thing we'll be doing is looking at, like I mentioned before, the real thing. What we also I want to be looking at is advancing Dewey Burdock to get that into production as soon as possible to respond to market conditions, and advancing, if assuming that we make progress, quick time progress on it, to begin looking at doing applications on gas hills sometime in 2022. Those are kind of the next 2 to 3 years, and beyond that, we'll be bringing on some other properties in South Texas, we expect by then, well as hopefully having production being sourced out of South Dakota and then ultimately out of Wyoming. So over the next 5 years, that's kind of where we see things coming out. We'll be doing work on our New Mexico projects as well, to be able to begin to, obviously get their resource, et cetera, to NI 43-101 classification, but also make them production options going forward, assuming the market's sustainable and sustains it, and will support their development.
Paul, that looks pretty good, and lots of stuff here. You guys have a pipeline that's stuffed full of things to do here. Also you have extensive experience. Probably one of the few people in the U.S. that has extensive experience in working with the tribes in the U.S. And of course, you'll need their support on a number of Encore projects. Talk about some of these efforts to bring them in and create a fellowship to align their support for these projects, including this potential project here with Dewey Burdock.
Dewey Burdock is going to be, it's got a long history with tribal involvement and interaction. That one is that project is going to be, it's going to be more of a, I'd say I don't want to commit to any particular strategy at this point, because we're still advancing. It'll be advancing through, there'll be some court actions going on that'll define kind of some of the major outstanding issues that are out there with the tribes. And it's only one tribe, basically. Where we've been focusing our effort really is where we expect to be doing most of our effort is in New Mexico. And that's principally with the communities in and around the Navajo Nation, as well as potentially, working with the Navajo Nation as well. And that's some of the strategies that are out there are similar to what we've seen and elsewhere, where you've got effectively tribal companies or Native American owned companies bringing in, providing some kind of sweat equity to get earn in position into the operations or potential projects to where they can develop and advance along with us, that they have a piece of the action, but also they have a piece of the accountability, which is one of the things that they expect. And there's similarities both in Saskatchewan as well, even in the U.S., where you've got Navajo tribal companies purchasing and owning and operating coal mines in the Western U.S. And that's going to take a bit of work to get there. It's going to take some communication, some involvement, some back and forth to see what the best strategy is with the other tribal communities. We're hopeful that that will progress, and it could provide leverage in South Dakota as well.
If I could, I might just add, one of the key motivating factors behind whatever we do will be local wealth creation and certainly opportunities for that. And we've had a very strong commitment to that since we've begun. And our background on the gold side and working in Canada has given us, and even back, even with Black empowerment issues with Uranium One in South Africa. So there's a full pedigree across the spectrum at Encore, and really it doesn't matter whether it's uranium mines or any other kind of project. You've got to make yourself welcome. You've got to create a reason for the local community to want you to be there, and it really boils down to local opportunity and wealth creation, and that's going to be at the heart of what we do. Now, how we achieve that, various methods and manners that Paul was alluding to, and don't want to be committing to any one of those, but that's really the bottom line, is we've got to make it to where any community wants us there. That goes for our projects in Texas, anywhere. Even if you've got permitting friendliness, really, you've got to enjoy local support, and that's something that we're committed to.
True. Yes, I think you start at the local level and work your way out that way, but the local is so critical, and certainly in this business by a significant amount. Well, to wrap up here, Bill, for potential investors and even the Encore skeptics, new ones and former ones who are listening in, what would you say to them at this stage and at current price levels? Why should they consider Encore Energy now? And what would you say to them about the credibility of this company?
Well, I think the credibility is probably the first reason you buy a company, at least for a long-term investment. And midterm, maybe not trading opportunity so much, but for a real investment, it is credibility. And quite frankly, we've delivered on our plan. We came into this with a very deep team, very good bench, seizing production assets with our first M&A opportunity. Certainly bided our time, waiting a decade before launching, even though we were funded. We certainly missed a lot of the previous false starts in the business, so I think our timing is good, which is always something we've maintained. Our fiscal responsibility, something we've always alluded to and maintained, continue to do so. But really, this will be our second major merger in less than 12 months. And I noticed that some of the people have been saying, "Oh, well, this is what the last company was built on. Where is that?" They're getting tired of waiting. Well, these things take time, and you don't want to just be doing a merger for the sake of doing one. This one fits so well. It fits like a glove. And here again, it goes to the production pipeline, the plan of becoming the dominant ISR producer in the U.S., and a bit of a longer-term vision, both short, long-term, and mid-term, but a longer-term vision of building a company rather than what are we going to do in the next 6 months. I don't know what the uranium price is going to do in the next 6 months. I don't know what the market's going to do in the next 6 months. What I do know is that the supply and demand on uranium is a compelling argument. I believe it's probably the only commodity that absolutely is going to have a supply deficit regardless. You just look at the amount of burn versus the amount of new production, and it's inevitable. Timing, you may be off 12 months or something, but it's going to happen. And we're building a company to have not only a very quick production, but sustainable and growing production profile over what we expect to be a very long cycle in the nuclear fuel industry. So I think it's a complete picture, to really sum it up in one phrase. It's a complete picture, and that should be compelling for the investor.
Paul, any points you'd like to add?
As Bill said, this is a long-term view, long-term strategy that's premised on the fact that we know that the uranium industry is going to prosper with the nuclear industry, and that with nuclear's continued support publicly and increasing public support, We see it continuing to grow. We already know that right now there's about 55 reactors under construction at the moment, and 2 of which are in the U.S. We expect that to continue. There's more reactors operating now than there were prior to Fukushima in 2011. I see this as a long-term opportunity, and that's why we're building the company with these short-term, mid-term, and long-term elements to it to be able to achieve a long-term sustainable revenue and production profile that will continue to meet the needs of a growing nuclear industry.
Bill, what's the best way for investors to reach out to the company if they have any questions?
Well, the first place would be the website. I think that obviously we'll have, the combined pro forma company going forward in terms of its presentation. And, this company is going to have lots of news coming out, so that's certainly one. And, in terms of contacting either Paul or myself, we're both available on fairly short notice. Can't guarantee you we'll get back on an email the same day, but certainly I've always maintained within 3 days I'll get back to any potential investor or investor, and I'd be glad to take any questions or comments and address any concerns, go into more detail, elaborating our plans, what have you. But we're keenly aware that the shareholders own the company, and I want to provide them as much information in a timely manner as possible.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Keep up the efforts and all ahead.
All right. Well, thanks.
Good talking again.